You're going to record this?
Yeah.
Well, that means I'm going to have to be clean then. Goodness.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming to the 7th installment of the Spring 2021 lecture series titled Crisis. I would like to welcome our guest and lecturer this evening, Andrew Freear, Director of Rural Studio. Andrew is speaking from Italy this evening, so we want to thank him for joining us despite the large time difference. The series has been planned, organized, and hosted by the Student Lecture Committee comprised of Leland Young, Arya Hill, Emma Sweden, Tim Cox, Connor Liedner, Benjamin Sturkey, Matthias Montenegro Sandoval, Keith Hack, Gates Breeden, Connor Brown, and your host this evening, Jake Swartz. As a reminder, this lecture is being recorded for the school's distributive purposes. Feel free to submit your questions in the chat as they come, or at the end of the lecture when we have more time for more discussion during our question and answer. If you would like to ask your question anonymously, you can submit your questions privately to me or any of the other members of the committee. Additionally, you can use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be more than happy to call on you to ask your question. At that point, you can turn on your microphone or your video and personally ask Andrew your question. Andrew Freear is the J. Streeter Wiatt Professor at the Auburn School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture, and has acted as the Director of Rural Studio since 2001. Rural Studio is an off-campus design build program within the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture at Auburn University. Co-founded in 1993 by Samuel Mockbee and D.K. Ruth, Rural Studio started with an ethos of recycling and reusing in the hopes of improving the living conditions of under-resourced communities in rural Alabama. Some 28 years later, Rural Studio is still working towards the same ethos. The studio has evolved to larger multi-year, multi-phase projects around 5 counties with a concentration on addressing community needs. With an emphasis on educating citizen architects, the studio hopes to act as a good neighbor and friend. As director, Andrew acts as liaison and advocate between local authorities, community partners, and students. Andrew has been involved in writing 3 books about Rural Studio and was the co-author of the 3rd, entitled Rural Studio at 20, Designing and Building in Hale County, Alabama. Besides teaching and leading Rural Studio, Andrew has exhibited the group's work at institutions such as the Victoria and Albert Museum, MoMA, the Whitney Biennial, and recently at the Venice Biennale. Without further ado, it is with great pleasure that I welcome our guest this evening, Andrew Freear.
I guess it would help if I unmute. Hello, thank you, Jake. Great pleasure to be here. Always delighted to support student initiatives, and I am sorry that I'm doing this at 1 o'clock in the morning, so if I fall asleep in the middle of it, just yell, will you? Because I will bore myself. I hope you all will try and laugh at my jokes, because it's really tough talking to a blank screen. Shit. Okay, I'm gonna share. Oops. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Thumbs up. All right, great. Yeah, I, for my sins, have been at Rural Studio, I think, for 21 years. So hopefully what I can bring to you tonight is sort of an insider's view of what has gone on in the place, try to get a little bit beyond the magazines and the sexy photographs and the magazine stuff, and try to show you a little bit about the educational process that I think we're pretty proud of. Thank you, Jake, for the invite. I appreciate you bugging me and even deciding that you were desperate to pay me, because I don't know what that's about. Obviously got money to give away or burn or something. You might regret offering to pay at the end of this shit anyway. So all the work that you're going to see today is actually, you know, made by folks like you, folks that are between the ages of 18 and 23 years old. It's all paid for by soft money. We try to raise or need to raise somewhere in the region of 200 to 250,000 a year to help us do what we do. The state doesn't pay for any bricks and mortar, so everything that you see that's bricks and mortar is actually paid by donations or grants. I think one of the reasons for our prolificness, I don't know that I want to say success, but probably prolificness is we've stayed in one place for all those years and sort of become a neighbor. We haven't been one of those programs that's been like a helicopter program where you fly in and you fly out and you do something and you never really know whether or not it worked. We have very much learned by doing. I think I'd like to think that all the work we do today is done out of necessity. We're actually asked to do it. And I think we're lucky enough to, being a kind of a state institution and allowed to ask some fairly critical and ethical questions. First and foremost, what should we do rather than what we can do? I mean, I think architects, particularly at architecture school, are encouraged to think about what they can do. And I think we like to ask the question what we should do. And frankly, sometimes building's not always the answer. I think that's one of the difficulties of running a program like this, is that folks walk in here expecting to build something and be heroic, and that bricks and mortar is the answer, and it's not always the case. So we have actually also have the luxury of saying we're not going to do that. We're not really, like some not-for-profits end up being ambulance chasers because they have to follow the cash. We're looking at, my salary is actually paid by the state, so our program, I hope, would still survive if we're not building buildings, right? But of course, all that's very complicated because students are actually coming to our program to build stuff. So there's a tension there, as you can imagine. I like to think that we take responsibility for our successes and our failures. I mean, obviously, we've built something in the region of 250 projects in and around Hale County in about a 20-mile radius. And it's interesting, when you do good, you don't hear anything about it. Of course, when you screw up, you hear about it. So it's a very good feedback loop, both as an architect and as a teacher, and we try to take advantage of that. I think I'm not, one of the things that I should point out tonight is that what you're seeing, a lot of this work is done voluntarily. You cannot build and design and build a firehouse in 9 months. I'm sorry, it just doesn't happen. So the first 9 months might be designing, and probably the second 9+ months will be building, where those students are kind of invited to volunteer and stay on and do the project. And we, the faculty and the staff, support that. So if you're comparing it to other programs, we have that luxury of these kind of what we call leftovers who stay around and decide to put their heart and soul into doing these projects just because it's the right thing. Also, not just to get, a certificate or a stamp. The other kind of dirty secret, honestly, is that we're able to make decisions locally relatively quickly because there's very little bureaucracy locally. There's no money to police the building permit process. So to all intents and purposes, you can almost run out in the backyard and build whatever you want. Now, obviously we don't. We work to International Building Code. All of our consultants work to International Building Code. And it's actually, in some respects, it's more difficult because you actually, if you're in a position to make a conscious choice to break something, that's on your back rather than having the checklist of the IBC to say you did this. So we don't take any of that lightly. But it is a truth that because of the lack of bureaucracy, the fact that I have the major leaders in Hale County at the end of the phone, and we can make decisions with the community, it gets rid of the kind of firewalls and the bureaucracy that exist. And I think we ask students to leave the place just a little bit better than they found it. I think there's always a danger that young folks from other places are going to come into a place like Hale County and start to tell folks how they should live their lives. So we're very careful not to have any of that finger wagging. I hope the other thing tonight, I hope it offers up a kind of a positive critique of how we teach, procure, and make architecture. I think that's something that's really important, that we're always challenging ourselves about the way we are educating ourselves and actually the way that projects are made. I mean, I think we do some remarkably sophisticated and mature things for a bunch of folks that are between those ages of 18 and 23. And that's because of a lot of good hand-holding, but also just using folks' energy and enthusiasm. And there's a lot to be said for that. So the other thing I do tonight, if I don't fall asleep, is communicate the pure, unadulterated joy in creating, designing, and building. I mean, it's also a incredible privilege. I think one of the problems in the world today is that we've forgotten how much of a privilege it is to build something and to dig a hole in the ground and make a fucking mark on this planet. And we've done it too much, and we need to reflect on that. So as I say, it's important that you laugh at my jokes, or I will just accidentally leave the meeting. I think Zoom's oh, there's somebody laughing already. Look at that little smiley thing. We have been lucky in Hale County to be 100% face-to-face, and I do wish for you all that you could be best face-to-face with each other, because I think it's communication is so incredibly important, and interacting with people is so incredibly important, and hugging people and all of that good stuff. So I wish all that for you. So yeah, hopefully tonight I'll keep you awake and entertain the punters. Normally I would be coming from this place, in a place that's slightly fancier than this. Talk about chalk and cheese. This is Newburn. I live about a mile up the road on the left-hand side as the crow flies. It's a little town of 178 people. I'm not quite certain how many folks are on this. We've got 100 more in Newburn than this audience, about 178. A quick geography lesson for you all. Whoops. Why doesn't that work? It's not letting me forward for some reason. Strange.
Maybe try unsharing and share the screen again.
Yeah, it's not letting me forward or do anything. So sorry. Sorry about this. Right, let's try this. Yeah, okay, geography lesson. Alabama. Hopefully you all know where Alabama is, although you probably don't care, but this is, it's important to show this just from the point of view of the name of the place that I work is the region is called the Black Belt. It's at the tail end of the Appalachians. And there was a kind of a prehistoric lake that was at the confluence of the Appalachian mountain region. And when that lake disappeared, it left behind it a whole bunch of beautiful black dirt, and that gave the name to the place, the Black Belt. It's not because there's a whole bunch of black folks here, so just to be clear about that. It's also our program is in Newbern. You can see this on the east side of, on the west side of the state. We very much live in the kind of the everyday history of the civil rights movement. A lot of it was family on family, so there's great evidence of that every day as we live and go about our work. I would like to just make a little bit of a call out for a conversation about the rural. All of the architects tend to just talk about urban conditions, and you know, the truth of the matter is that everybody says that the rural is in decline. Well, if you look at the US census over the last 100+ years, the truth of the matter is that rural population has actually remained incredibly stable at about 60 million inhabitants, which is about the country the size of Italy. It's just the urban population has gone through the roof. One of the problems, I think, is for a place, this particular rural place, is that they're considered as places of extraction. And, 27% of the people around me live in and below the poverty line. And I think it's a lot because what stuff is taken away from places like the Appalachians, the Mississippi Delta, and the Colonias, and little is given back. And I wish for a kind of a symbiotic relationship between the urban and the rural. This just simply treating it as an extraction landscape is frankly no good. There's probably a more shocking statistic, which, oh no, it's locked up again. You're shitting me. Oh, it hasn't. Okay. So a more shocking statistic, and you can see no coincidence. Here's the extraction landscapes, all in the dark colors. But the county over from us, there's 60% of the kids in the county next over from us in Perry County live below the poverty line. That's outrageous in the good old United States of America. And again, nobody talks about this stuff. So I think it just really needs to be on the agenda that rural areas should just not be places of extraction. The other thing, frankly, to say is, if we want a national dialogue, if we want communication with each other, this is actually a screenshot of the kind of, hell, I've forgotten what the name is, but the service provider offers you this kind of this review of the speed, and this, it proudly states that my satellite internet connection is 1,140% slower than the national average. So my question to you all is, how can 60 million Americans participate in a national dialogue when the connectivity is so shit and they're held to ransom by these service providers? So there's many injustices. There's fragility and inequality in housing, education, and it's frankly unsustainable. And I think it leads to things like we had in the previous election, where people feel disenfranchised and angry at the world. So we should try to do something about it. I have locked up again. So this is us. This is what we look like. The old grey-haired old fart sitting in the middle of all these undergraduates. We have 3 sets of programs. We have 3rd years, 5th years, and a very small graduate program. The 3rd years are typically doing a small house. The 5th years get involved in community projects, and the graduates are doing some research work for us, exploring envelopes and kind of cutting edge building technology with actually with McGill University at the moment. This is getting sickening. It keeps locking on me. So we only let the ladies use the big tools. We don't let the guys use any of the big toys. The gals love to use these big tools. This is downtown Newbern. 3 fragile institutions, as I like to say: a School of Architecture, the Post Office, and Newbern Mercantile. This is probably not like Virginia Tech. This is what it means to love to be an architect. This is inside the Red Barn. So you get a really clear environmental understanding and message here in this building, which is basically, in winter you put your clothes on and in summer you take them off, right? There couldn't be anything clearer than that. We do like to think of ourselves as being in the center of community. We deliberately took this old barn on, put all of these students in it, and wanted to engage and be in the face of the local community and allow them in to see what we did into the ivory tower. So we have things like pumpkin carve, where we encourage the local kids to come and carve pumpkins with our students. We then have a costume contest. This is indeed Toy Story wandering up Highway 61 in the middle of nowhere. And we all dress up, and then we have a very serious architectural review. And this is 3 toilets actually talking about a very serious 20K house project. So the point is that we take the work very seriously, but we like to not take ourselves too seriously, as you can tell. So rest of downtown, this is Newbern Post Office, which has just been reduced to 4 inconvenient hours a day, which of course is probably going to be its death knell. But these places are really important for us to meet and greet each other and say hello. This is Beyonce, she was celebrating her birthday the day that I took a photo. And then Newbern Mercantile, which is the only place locally where you can buy Colt 45 orange juice and gasoline. So it's important to keep your diet up with a place like this. The guy in the pink shirt, GB Woods, actually retired after 49 years and 10 months, and we were desperately worried that the whole place was going to die. But thankfully, a young couple have taken it over and doing short order cooking, so it's really thriving at the moment using Facebook, ironically. So it's a fragile place, fragile at many levels. Last 2 or 3 weeks, we actually had tornadoes come through very close to us. We really dodged a bullet, quite frankly. So we live in Tornado Alley. Making a living is really tough. Generally, folks may well drive to Tuscaloosa or even Birmingham to work in the service sector. There are folks stubbornly trying to live off the land. One of the things that we discovered actually was that, they discovered 60 years ago, the local farmers, was that beautiful black dirt that I talked about has actually generally been poisoned or washed away by over monocultivation and chemicals. And so what's left is this red clay that's underneath it. But lo and behold, if you dig a hole and you fill it full of water, that edge becomes super saturated. So you've got yourself a fairly inexpensive pond. So they're breeding catfish and selling catfish, and it's most likely, if you eat catfish up where you guys are, it's likely to come from our neck of the woods or in Mississippi. The other thing they're doing is so they diversify between catfish, beef herds, and some root vegetables. They've actually, frankly, even just kind of started to return back to cotton, can you believe? So ironically. Speaking of cotton, during the antebellum period, or just pre-Civil War, this was one of the wealthiest places in the world and in the country, off the back of slavery, of course. These houses, of course, were built under incredibly dubious circumstances, but they still do exist. They're all built of wood, and they've sat out here for 150 years. And so we try to take lessons from them, and the lessons from the way that they were put together. good cross ventilation, tall ceilings, porches, big overhangs, big roofs, raise the building off the ground. So what can you learn from the positive things about the history of these wooden homes? And of course, also from the local farm vernacular. And this particular building is spectacular. This is a little seed barn, and you know, any architect would die for this cantilevering roof. It's really beautiful. But evidence of the African slave carpentry with the center entrance. But you know, what more can you say? Big roof, raise it off the ground, keep the wood out of the ground, and can last a very, very long time. So that's a real beauty. So we have, as was made clear, we've been here since '93. Our service radius is about 20 miles for me to kind of keep an eye on what folks are doing. I think one of the first house we ever did was the straw bale house. This, I think probably to this day, is still the best house we ever did. It has Mockby's hands all over it. Great southern porch, and then the little smokehouse out front built of broken roadside concrete. And so we started out building these houses for individual families and clients, and they got quite idiosyncratic. This was one that was built using 70,000 hand-stacked carpet tiles from Interface. Interface came to us, wanted to get involved in sponsoring a house, and we asked them if they had any waste product, and they said they had all of these tiles that had been sitting in one of their warehouses, had never been used, but they'd off-gas for 7 years. And so we agreed to try and build a house out of carpet tiles. So you can imagine a fantastically, a house with fantastic acoustic and thermal properties because of those tiles. And I don't know that this was actually, ironically enough, this was done during Samuel Mockby's, the year that he died. And I'm not certain that we do this house today, because it's always a little bit worrying building a house out of products that are essentially petroleum based. But you know, we've all got to be careful about what is in the materials that we use on houses. But it enabled these folks to have this family's a big family, and they used to live in 2 rooms. And AJ, the kid on the left, his performance at school and in life went through the roof when he got his own bedroom. So, and they love their house. You know, they're so thankful to believe that they've got one of the most unique houses in the entire world, and they love it. So, but I don't know that I would have done it. But there you go. So through those idiosyncratic houses, I got kind of frustrated that we weren't really enabling students to kind of learn some of the rudimentaries and the basics. So we kind of reverted to a lot of stick frame housing and wanted to be creative using stick frame housing. This is a house that was called the Cedar House, an expandable courtyard house that was built for Rosalie Turner. And 90% of this was built with things that we recycled and scavenged. And here's Rosalie on her great front porch. We also started around the turn of the end of the last century. That always sounds fantastic. The end of the last century. In the last century, we started getting asked to do little community projects. This is one called the Masons Bend Community Center and Glass Chapel. It was built using windows from Chevrolet Caprice automobiles, not actually Oldsmobiles as is in this photograph, but the guys went up to Chicago and went to one of these scrapyards and brought all of these wind down windows back with them that already had a pre-drilled hole in them. And at that time at architecture school, every kid at architecture school was doing fish scales. So these guys actually got to live out their dream and do a fish scale on top of a rammed earth wall. And it's a very beautiful little piece, much smaller than everybody seems to think it is from these photographs. But you know, we made mistakes in projects like this. One of the things that happened with this project is that the kids played in it and graffitied on it. And, you know, when people go there and visit it, they're always disappointed that somehow the parents aren't stopping them doing that. So if, you know, if we'd given them a mechanism to enclose it and lock it up, et cetera, that might not have happened. So you've always got to be careful in your aspirations and learn from these things. And although, you know, clearly the aspiration in this is great beauty, but then these guys built a chapel, another chapel. This was actually a private chapel using 700 tires that were kind of donated from a guy in Selma that was being sued as a fire risk. And so we inherited these 700 tires, filled them with ram dirt, and then covered them in pink concrete and made this really, these guys built a really remarkable piece of architecture. It's on the edge of a ravine. The pulpit hangs out over that ravine, and this is the view back from that ravine. So really, and then they scavenged the roof structure from an old barn. Really an amazing piece of work, that one. So, but, you know, Mockbee died in early 2000. We were not clear that the whole thing was going to survive. And then somewhere around like 2005, 2006, we really sort of started to think, well, we're here to stay. So what are the bigger issues that we want to deal with, and really kind of address fundamental rural issues? So one of those, of course, was the housing question. Something like 40% of the housing stock in the county that I live in is in disrepair and is old. And there are not many models that the financing market can actually can use as models for people wanting to build a home and also get a mortgage. When I went to Hale County, I kid you not, there was actually people still living on dirt floors. What has replaced those is the trailer home. The trailer pitch is kind of quite straightforward. You can, you know, get your dream home pretty quickly. You buy it on the never, much like an automobile. The problem is that it devalues about as quickly as an automobile. In fact, it falls into the ground even quicker than an automobile. So it's not a great investment for anybody. And it's also not real property, it's chattel property. So people might believe that they're investing in a home, they're not really investing in a home. So we started to say to ourselves, is there something that we could do that could be an alternative to that? Not replace it, because it's such a smart con that, you know, it will survive, but we need an alternative to this. And we started to look at what the poorest of the poor might be able to afford. Way back in 2003, when we were looking at poverty level or social security income, we kind of figured that folks could have probably afford about $100, $110 a month in mortgage or rent, which is not a lot of money. And we started to, you know, scratch our head and think, well, that actually rolls out to be something like a $20,000 mortgage on a 30-year ticket. So we said to ourselves, can we, what could we do with that? And again, this is 2003, so this is a good while ago, right? And the other thing we wanted to do was it become a kind of an economy of building small homes. So build the homes in the community, buy the community for the community, keep the money there. Whereas the trailer home money goes to somewhere in the Carolinas where they produce those trailers. We wanted these buildings to be built out of the local hardware store. So we challenged ourselves to what could we build with, you know, $12,000 to $13,000 in materials, assume that about half of the rest of it would go to a contractor, needed it to be built in 3 days. What was the impact on the local economy if we could actually do that? And that has taken us off on this adventure. We've been basically doing 1 or 2 prototypes every year. We have 2 or 3 or 4 that we've started to like. The program a couple of years ago actually got discovered by Fannie Mae. Can you believe that the 3 CEOs from Fannie Mae, each of whom are earn over $2 million and are running a portfolio of $3 trillion, actually came to Newbern, Alabama, and had lunch with me in the Mercantile. They brought an entourage and their guards to check out the place before they went into it. And at the end of the day, they agreed to sponsor our little 20K program because lo and behold, there's nobody else is looking at rural housing, and they need rural housing models for their mortgage market and their mortgage industry. So it was baffling to me that they'd end up coming and talking to a bunch of undergraduates in the middle of nowhere, but there you go. So I thought they were kidding. Anyway, so we have some that we like. This is, and they, there's two or three of these are very much kind of what you would kind of are very much rural vernacular, and completely by accident, because it's at the end of the day, it's what the capacity of the timber can do. It essentially, these 13-foot wide houses is what the timber can do, which is not much different to what the timber could do 100 years ago when they were building little houses. So this is a shotgun house, so called because you can shoot your gun through the front door and the bullet goes out the back door. Essentially a little like a studio apartment, a big living space divided off from the bedroom by the bathroom. This was all these houses are named after the first occupant. So we tried to we're scratching design out of nothing. It's a very, gray-haired, old fart white guy, old white-haired guy project. Because it's tough. I mean, we believe in porches, we believe in tall ceilings, we look for cross ventilation, how to bring good light in, deep reveals around windows. And it's unglamorous, but it's really important. And, so the evolution of that was the side entrance, which divides the house from the day to the night. So the night's on the left and the day's on the right. And this was kind of a modified dog trot house where the kitchen became part of the dog trot. This is Mac's home. And then this is Joanne's house. Joanne, she actually got a square house, and this was us testing the premise that, apparently mathematically, the most efficient shape is either a circle or a square for the same amount of perimeter. So this house actually has more square footage in it for the same perimeter as the two previous houses. This is quite a nice house. You can see the top half of the plan is all of the kind of quote unquote social space, and the bottom half of the plan is the kind of nighttime, more private space. That's the view sitting in the living room looking out through the porch. So this is an ongoing project. We are still doing these houses. We've actually got 6 partners in the Southeast that are building these homes. We've got a feedback loop going with those communities and with those contractors to tell us how good our product is. And it's bringing feedback into what was previously just an academic game. So very excited about that. Relative to the community projects, I think we kind of realized we were living in a forest, so it was really important that we build out of wood, but also that we do projects that can support the kind of local democracy and, most importantly, the local youth and the aspirations of local youth. This particular project's actually not quite either of those. This is a fire station that was built by these 4 adults. We make them wear fancy dress while they're building instead of PPE. This is the kind of rough and gruff community that they were working with. We had a number of house fires in Newbern, and it hits people in the pocketbook pretty immediately. You have a lot of house fires. Guess what happens? The insurance rates go up. So people are like, how do you reduce our insurance rates? Well, you get yourself a town fire department. So that was the incentive for this. I became part of the fire department group. And we agreed that the building should kind of celebrate the new organization. The organization was across the community, blacks, whites, Mennonites, and nobody had tickets on the location or the building, and we wanted it to be celebratory, and so we built a little butler building in the back while we were doing this building. And the other thing to say about the building is it was important because they got grants for the fire trucks, and the prerequisite for the grants was that they had to the trucks couldn't have to freeze, because in rural areas you actually carry water. The tender carries water to the fire, so the last thing you want is a frozen truck when you're getting to the fire. So this big southern wall that's built of polygal actually helps that big concrete thermal mass floor to make sure that this space never freezes. So this was built by 4 students in about 2 years. They helped the community raise over $100,000, and they designed and completed it in a couple of years. So that evolved into the mayor coming to us and saying that he wanted help with a little town hall. The question with the town hall was, there was a space next to the firehouse that had been created, and it was actually the only space that the town owned. And so we decided to kind of bookend the firehouse, put the short side to the street and do the long, narrow building, which is kind of classic rural town. But this time make a little civic courtyard. So we made the kind of civic heart for New Bern. And then the question was, what do you build this little building out of that has some mass and weight and gravitas, and also can compete with the Big Brother firehouse, the famous firehouse? And we decided to build it out of cypress logs, out of a local cypress swamp. The students dressed them all and then literally stacked them all like a log cabin. So this is like Lincoln logs, right? And the beauty of this is that people know exactly what it's made of. There's no I mean, one of the issues with the American way of building is this kind of layers, and they tend to be quite thin. And this, you can really feel what it's made of. It has great weight and gravitas, and it's made of one material. It, come on, don't lock up on me now. Didn't lock up on it, I don't know. I guess after I speak a certain amount of time, there's so much bullshit comes out, it locks me out. There you go, it's doing it again. So yeah, cypress logs stacked. The thing that we were cognizant of was that the wall, if you build a 13-foot high wall out of timber, that wall was predicted to actually shrink over 3 inches. So how do you deal with an opening like a window or a door? And we decided to basically put them on the outside, put the windows on the outside and face mount them, and the doors on the inside and face mount them, so that if the wall shrank, it didn't actually crush and break the glass. So the nice consequence of that is that you actually see the full thickness of the material at the window opening. This is the council chamber. This was actually at the opening. So as a consequence, all of these kind of came kind of one after the other in our little town of New Bern. These lovely gals had been harassing me for about 10 years to do a library. And 4 of them are actually high school teachers. They recognized the shitty broadband. They wanted to bring a library in, get some after school classes, and give access to a good broadband network. So when we built the town hall, this building had actually been used for voting and some of the council meetings, relatively unsuccessfully for democracy. But this little building was the old bank in New Bern, had been abandoned in the 30s, and the family that owned it donated to the library, and we really just stripped it down and cleaned it up, and then made a new interior. We kind of designed an off-center large reading space, and did an essay in plywood. And again, this was designed by 4 students in about 2.5 years. Contains about 25,000 books, and the building is going gangbusters today. It's really sad at COVID, because you can imagine that's really just taken the wind out of their sails, but this place is just going terrific. we did take the old bank vault, and you see it in the front right here, and we demolished the bank vault because it was actually, we found that there was a kind of a pond underneath the building because it had a crawl space and all the water from the road was finding the lowest point, and it just happened to be under the building. And then the foundation for the bank vault was actually wicking water into the building and creating a lot of humidity. So we had to get rid of that, pour a slab inside the building, and in getting rid of the bank vault, we took down all of the blocks, all of the bricks, and used the bricks to then make the garden courtyard next to it. And then you see these little rooms off the side. There's the kids' space to the left. That's a kids' nook. And then this is the little garden reading nook that we use some of the materials from the old interior in it. So it's changed life in downtown Newbern quite considerably. This is another project that I think we're very proud of, Black History Safe House Museum. This is Theresa Burrow. She actually hid Dr. King from the Ku Klux Klan 2 weeks before he was assassinated. He was in West Alabama making a lot of speeches in the local churches, and he actually stayed in the building on the left, which was her home. In future years, she got the building next to it, hers donated, and established a little Black History Safe House Museum that commemorated that night, but also commemorated the foot soldiers of the movement. The civil rights movement really started in the rural areas and spread to the cities. So the folks running this are aging, as you can imagine. And so they came to us and asked us to try and give it a future where it could be run by one person and the buildings could be connected together. So we stripped them down, cleaned them up. They were two really fabulous little shotgun houses, rebuilt the porch on the left, gave it a lick of paint, and then made a connecting piece between the two buildings so you could have one entrance. These additions on the back were demolished, and then the building on the left was actually extruded to make a new gallery space so that people going to what was a very small exhibit in the rest of the building donate that was in tribute to King and that night, and also to the foot soldiers. You need something else that will encourage folks to come to a museum again. So that space is actually a gallery space where they have rotating galleries. So this is the connector with a fritted glass. All of the local foot soldiers were involved in the march from Selma to Montgomery. So that's fritted on the glass, which is on the kind of southwest facing side. Then we found these interiors when we stripped off the shit from the inside, and really we had a bit of a dilemma because we found this really beautiful, but we didn't want to patronize the client by saying we love this patchwork. But thankfully they agreed with us, so we just cleaned it up, gave it a lick of paint on the trim, and left the rest of it as it, put some new trim in, obviously, and some new lighting, but kept the walls the way that we found them. This is the main part of the exhibit. It's in very small rooms, so it's really difficult to actually photograph that, but our students made the didactic panels for all of the pieces in there. And then this is that gallery space. And in the new extrusions, we did underfloor heating and made the section different to the main house. So cartoon-wise, the shape is the same, but the interior space was different to mark the new from the old. This is the opening. A lot of the older foot soldiers are there. Most of them have passed away now. Sadly, Theresa died last year. So, but it has a good future, and it's all part of the civil rights trail. We also started to learn how to do larger projects in small chunks. This was fantastic park project. Perry County, I talked to you about that county that had 60% of kids below the poverty line. This place had no outdoor recreational space, and the probate judge came to us and said, I'd like you to reopen this park that had been closed in the 70s, and it's on these oxbow lakes. And so he challenged us to firstly do a pavilion for visitors, and to kind of celebrate the reopening of the park. So we built a pavilion. And he liked the pavilion so much, he said, look, we've got $50,000 for prefabricated restrooms. Will you build us some really beautiful restrooms? And so I said yes. So this team of 4, I think, built probably the 3 most remarkable pooping experiences in the United States of America. They also built the walkway to the pavilion. So on the left is the mound. On the left is the long toilet. In the center is the mound toilet, and on the right is the tall toilet. So this is the view from the John sitting in the tall toilet. This is the long toilet. This is where Jake likes to go and talk to the tree. So he sits there and talks to a tree because nobody else will listen to him. And then this is the mound toilet, where the shape dives into the mound. And if you look at this shape, you can actually go in there and sit on the John and shoot at the deer as they run across the fire lane that's in front of you. So the community had kind of run out of money at that stage, but they desperately wanted to open the park to the birding fraternity. This is on the migratory trail, birding trail. And apparently ornithologists spend an awful lot of money on their sport. And so the locals wanted those folks to come here, and they wanted us to do a birding tower. And we said, well, in that particular location, we're going to have to get you there over this creek. So we ended up building a bridge to get across the creek to be able to do the birding tower. So this is a little Toblerone section. It's 3 Toblerone sections. So essentially, the 2 end sections are supported centrally. I think, there you go. They're supported here and here, right? And then they're tied down here and here. So you build that first, and then the center section you drop into place. It's a fairly straight, and we actually essentially built the engineer's drawing. These are the kinds of drawings, kinds of details that we do, drawings that we make, shop drawings that we make if we need stuff fabricating. So the trusses were fabricated in the parking lot close to the park. We then put them on a trailer axle, and then we put a towing hitch on the trailer axle. And that's actually me, the old guy with the sexy bottom there, running down, holding the truss up and stopping it bouncing up and down in the air. Because that truss was being put under tremendous strain as you're running down the road, as you can imagine. And then the kids got a crane donated for the weekend, and Craneworks lifted the 2 outer sections into place, and then they dropped the center section into place, and guess what? It actually fit. So the beauty of it is the truss is raised up in the air, it's protected, and it's also covered. So it's been incredibly durable. It's a pretty tough landscape to build in. It's a landscape that floods a lot. But it's remarkably beautiful. Just so you know, it does have a handrail on it. This is, we wanted to get the sexy photographs in before we put a shitty handrail in there. But we put a really nice handrail in, actually. But this is an old fellow with his nephew out fishing. And that led us to the pièce de résistance of the park, which was the community saying, we want a 100-foot birding tower in the park so you can get above the canopy of the trees. And Hurricane Ivan had been through that year, and there was a whole bunch of trees down, and we tried to kind of figure out how we could build something out of wood that would get out 100 foot up in the air, and we just got nowhere. It was like, we ended up with a big pyramid. So a wise guy showed up to one of our reviews and said, why don't you just go off and see if you can get one of those fire towers donated, where they used to watch for fires. And actually within a week, my team had got one donated for $10. And so I was in an oh shit moment as a teacher going, well, am I really going to have people working 100 foot up in the air? So they actually went off, and I said, go off and find yourself training. So they went off and became certified tower erectors and deconstructors. They trained on the tower in its original location. And there's me looking up at them going, y'all are stupid, aren't you? But they trained on the tower itself, and they took it down piece by piece. They took it to Birmingham, had it re-galvanized. We replaced all the bolts. We took it out to the park. The entire foundation we used helical anchors for, because the area next to the Oxbow Lake was very fragile, so there's no concrete. So each of those helical anchors goes down 26 feet into the ground, and we managed to put them in using a bobcat. And there's probably no way in the world we ever do this in this stupid era and generation. I have no idea if my bosses knew what the hell was going on, but yeah, we built a 100-foot birding tower, and it's in a spectacular location, and it's all held up by anchors that go into the ground that are great for uplift and lateral. So, and then they built this beautiful walkway that dances over the ecotone. And the great detail is that you see that handrail that winds its way. If you're frightened of heights, you can get on that walkway and you can walk up the entire tower without letting go of that handrail at any single point. So the point is to get you to the top of the tower. So, and then when you get there, you find this remarkable view. So nearly done. So that led us to another long-term project, which was Lions Park, 40-acre park that had gone into disrepair. Local community came to us and said, can you help? In 2000, we said, no, we don't have the capacity. After we'd done Perry Lakes, we realized we could do big projects in small chunks. So from 2006 to 2016, roughly, we did one project a year in this park. We had a flexible strategic plan. We worked with the community group every year to review the next step of the project. We in the community brought 50,000 to each phase of the project, and they've now got a park that's worth millions. And you know, they could never have dreamed of having that all in one foul shot. So, you know, we did new identity, kept the traffic out of the park, keep it on the road edge, built a bioswale to stop the cars going in, new graphic identity, these sticks camouflaged existing and new utilities. We built 6 ball fields with sponsored by Baseball Tomorrow, new backstops, restrooms that are powered, that are pressurized by water off the roof. Restrooms were built out of tilt-up concrete with prison toilets, new lights for the ball fields where the local pee-wee football come in, built a concession stand that opens and closes like a mouth, which seemed like a smart idea at the time. And then Tony Hawk, midway through, showed up, and some of the local kids had been annoying all the locals in the church parking lot. You know, not much to talk about, not many places to skate locally, and all these skinny kids that all look like they're on drugs were annoying all of these, you know, old folks in the church parking lot. So our team actually put an application into Tony Hawk, and lo and behold, Tony Hawk said yes. So he gave 30 grand to the city and the Raw Studio, and normally that 30 grand goes to a city to have a conversation about designing and building a skate park. And we actually built the entire thing for $30,000, and it's literally 4 inches of concrete laid over a series of dirt mounds, and really very nice project, this one. Frozen up on me again, too much bullshit. And then this one's a large adventure playground. We had a whole bunch of dirt, but we didn't really have any way to make spaces. And this guy showed up one Christmas when we were trying to figure out how to do this adventure playground and said, I've got a whole bunch of barrels if you need some barrels. So we took these barrels and actually aggregated them and made a kind of a ground plane of them. There's actually 7,000 barrels here that are stacked and welded together, and then the roof provides shade in the hot summer. And for the opening, the team, the community actually came and kind of played it like the Blue Man Group. It's really spectacular. So built a scout hut in the same park, exercise stations, and then these spaces to create shade while the trees that we planted in the park took. Just around the corner, we built this Boys and Girls Club, which is the largest and we've ever taken on. This was all built using sticks with this fantastic community group that was actually led by the police chief. He was concerned about the care and health and care of the kids after school. So we built this building that's actually half the length of a football field. And to finish, I think, you know, it's odd living in a rural area. The rural areas have become really quite, you know, have become real food deserts, frankly. It's odd to be in a rural area and not have access to freshly available fresh vegetables. And so people drive 10 miles to Piggly Wiggly to buy pre-processed packaged food, which is not particularly good for you. Or they go to McDonald's, which is incredibly cheap, as you can imagine, and is actually even cheaper than going to the grocery store. But the thing about all of this is our landscape has changed as food production has industrialized, and the landscape of these little towns has changed. So suddenly this little town looks like any other shitty little town. So I find it kind of depressing. The other truth of the matter is that it's killing us. This is actually a photograph of a 3-year-old McDonald's Happy Meal, which interestingly, if you want to keep a Happy Meal for 3 years, it doesn't change at all. Nothing wants to eat it. The French fries smell the same. The meat stays the same. The cheese smells the same. And we're putting it into our bodies. So you're better off putting the plastic toy into yourself than this shit. So be careful. And, you know, the bottom line is 2030, it's predicted that our areas, and your area in blue up there is not particularly healthy itself, but between, you know, 60 and 100% obesity in our area in 2030, which is not a problem. It's a downright catastrophe for the United States. So we've got to care about that. So the studio itself sort of addressed its own food and culture and wasn't very satisfied. We built our own kitchen, and then we decided, what about starting to farm for ourselves and grow our own food? So we did a strategic plan of all of our properties. We now seed, plant, harvest, and eat together. During the pandemic, we've been doing that 5 days a week. The students have bought into it completely every day. Every student commits a couple of hours. They commit about 16 hours a semester to working in the farm. Built our own infrastructure, huge, great greenhouse to extend the growing season. You can see the row cropping in the front yard. And it's been a sea change for us culturally and really important. So perhaps one of the biggest impacts was the local town asking us to design a farmer's market. The staff did the farmer's market. It wasn't a student project, but the local councillor had realized that there was nowhere for anybody to display freshly available local vegetables. So we designed these little market stalls that fit on the back of a wrecking truck that could be moved around, because little towns, they don't actually have own very much property. So we had to be aware that they might need to move these things. So this is a very quick video of moving these things down the road. Hopefully it'll work. Come on. Whoops. Why won't you work for me? Whoops. Oh, that did a lot of good, didn't it? Okay, well, sadly, why can't I make that work? No, it shows this being dragged down the road. I don't know. It worked before I started talking to Virginia Tech, so it's all y'all's fucking fault. But it has become, important in our community. Black, white folks, everybody uses it. Even the Mennonites are selling out of it. So, fragility at many levels. Don't eat the stuff on the left. Eat local. Local is really important. It builds culture. I think we like places to have identity. Food brings identity to a lot of places, like Florence, Italy has its identity through food. It's really important that we don't, abide to the factory food that is being shoveled to us. Anybody want to come and visit the Royal Studio are welcome. We like visitors. We're going to like them more in the next few months if you all get vaccinated. We have a big blowout at the end of the year and a big party. Unfortunately, we're having ours in 2 weeks' time and we're only doing it in-house, so nobody can come visit and there won't be any fireworks, but there you go. So you want to read the truth about Royal Studio, read that fantastic book that what I wrote. So I get a whole bunch of money out of it. But that will tell you the truth behind the bullshit that I told you today. So thank you for humoring me. And I have no idea how long I've gone. Oh, not so bad. Only 10 minutes over. I thought I'd be like 3 hours. So, have at it, y'all.
Thank you. I guess at this point we'll have to switch over to questions. If anyone would like to speak up, we also have some prepared questions.
Questions? I thought it was all perfect.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing this. I love this. It's really awesome. And I was already thinking of maybe doing a design build practice for my career. And this further cements it, just to see the attention of detail and stuff at the human scale that I wouldn't have thought of. Like I'm thinking back to when you had that library and there's that little space for the kids up in there, that little cubby space. Now I just think having that level of detail is awesome. But for a question, I was wondering, what do you think about if we brought this kind of approach into the urban areas and the impoverished areas and the urban areas, and how do you think that would work?
I mean, there are programs around the country that do that. I mean, there's a curmudgeon in Seattle, Washington, called Steve Bourdain, who I call the godfather of design build. He has been a great. Oh, no, you're kidding me. Your Mac is going to sleep unless plugged into a power outlet. Shoot. Hold on a second. I've got 10% left. Any idea how that long it'll last me?
It seems like it's working pretty hard.
Run to your charger.
Okay. Do you want me to go and get my power supply? It'll take me probably 3 minutes to get it.
Yeah, sure.
Probably smart.
Sorry. Apologies. I thought the thing was fully charged. Obviously, speaking so much bullshit took a lot of energy. So talk amongst yourselves.
I guess while we wait for Andrew, if anyone wants to preload their questions to go next, feel free to raise your hand or also leave them in the chat. But I guess we'll wait for Andrew.
Need some nice background music or something.
I got you.
Okay, Nate, let's go.
We've started a concert while we wait.
It's like elevator music. What the hell?
No problem.
Sorry, I ran down and then, of course, forgot to bring the adapter with it. So the question was, you know, I don't know if you're referring to design build programs or the kind of the work that we do. I mean, you all have an opportunity as you go forward to decide how you want to live your lives, and I would be careful of going into huge debt, because you can be beholden to that debt. You know, there's plenty of work to do in rural areas. The kind of question is how to make a living and how to survive. Our program is very lucky because it's a state-sponsored program. It would take a lot of commitment from somebody to come to and live in a place like ours and start to kind of figure out how to make projects like this happen. I think there are certainly design build programs in cities, but obviously the kind of the levels of bureaucracy and administration make it very much more difficult for them to do projects like this. I was in Bergen in Norway. I was invited to Bergen, Norway 3 or 4 years ago. They actually had a very interesting design build program going there where they were actually testing out urban interventions temporarily. So the students would make these proposals, work with the local municipality, and build these things. And then 99% of the time, people locally voted to keep those interventions. So they ended up being either rebuilt as permanent, or so there's ways to do programs like this. It just needs some creative thinking, because you have to accept that in a more bureaucratic city condition, it's more difficult. Steve Bourdain's does a lot of work in between zones, projects that kind of fall into categories like small parks or leftover spaces between buildings. I don't know if that's answering your question at all, but
yeah,
sorry.
I think so.
Forgive me.
I like the idea of the leftover spaces and what we can do with those.
Yeah. Well, and again, the point about the Bergen, Norway was it also kind of takes the guts of the administration to accept an idea like that. That city also actually had a planning department that decided to have a moratorium in one part of its city, where they asked people to openly challenge the building regulations, because they actually suggested that the building regulations were stymieing really good housing, and that actually proved quite successful as a place to test ideas.
We have a question in the chat from Nathan. For the $20,000 houses, have you considered the secondary market? How do you maintain the economical purpose of the houses upon resale when the homes are expected to increase in value?
What was the first part of the question?
Yeah, sure. For the $20,000 houses, have you considered the secondary market?
Yeah, the secondary market is tough. You have to actually consider rural housing quite differently to urban housing. I think we've started to understand it as being more of a life building condition, and one of the project in the studio at the moment is evolving quite a lot, because I think we've started to realize that you really do have to consider rural housing differently to urban housing, because it's not really a wealth building situation. You don't buy or build a house and then turn it over and flip it and make a profit on it. People generally build a home in a rural place and live in it, probably for their entire lifetime, and then their kids will inherit it, or somebody will inherit it. So we've really started to think about our houses as, lifetime houses, and these are a slightly different model to the ones that I've shown you, but because I think the reality is that because of the lack of demand, in an urban condition, most of the demand for homes is based on the kind of the high demand for land. In a rural area where there's not a high demand for housing and rural property, that there's never going to be kind of any lucrative rise in the value for people. And that actually, on the one hand, it's an opportunity, because you can make a home, and a lot of people do that in a rural area. They'll live and stay in that place. But it also, of course, it does, the downside is for some folks, it can create inertia. If you want to leave, you can't leave. So that's all very complicated. But I'm not certain how to answer your question, aside from saying that they're actually quite different to each other, rural and the urban condition in housing. So, one of the things we've really started to look at is flexibility and expandability. We're currently doing a house that's a truss house, that has an unfinished second floor to it. So it's also big enough, the footprint of it is big enough to convert the ground floor into a 3-bedroom house. And then if they want to inhabit the upstairs, it could be a 5-bedroom house for the same footprint of a normal 2-bedroom house. So really trying to think about how a house could evolve internally without putting additions on the exterior of it. A lot of the things that we've found in houses in the rural condition is that people will build a small house and then add on. And every time you add on, you create a moment of weakness, which is generally where these buildings all fail. So, we've really started to look at life building rather than wealth building, I guess, is the kind of slogan that we're looking at. If that makes sense to anybody.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm in shadow here. I had to sacrifice power for my computer versus a pretty light shined on my face. So. Did I answer anybody's question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
All right.
I think Joseph would like to ask you a question next.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you, first of all, for the talk. I just wonder if you could speak to the students generally about your advice about the way they might face building code issues or liability issues. And we're trying to work in a similar kind of way.
Building code, I think we're probably we're probably one of the few programs of architecture that, we're at the beginning of every year, we actually have code consultants. We try to encourage our students not to see the code as the enemy, but to just try to understand it and try to, we get folks to help us that try to explain the spirit of the code to us so that we can understand why it's there and what it's for, and not sort of reject it or try to avoid it. Sorry, the second part of your question?
Well, liability also, just the way when you work with students building things, what you're allowed to do, what pushback you get.
Well, it's really interesting. Our university has actually embraced the liability question similarly to schools of medicine or veterinary, right? Veterinary schools. And I think the point is, if it's okay for students to be involved in animals and people's bodies, can we not have the guts to look at offering up the kind of liability insurance for us as architects practicing what we will practice? So our program, we're all indemnified by our program and the university. As long as I'm a professor and they are students, we're covered by the university. One person that you might all be interested in talking to is a fellow in New York called Peter Gluck. He's somebody that was one of the first students in the Yale building program, and he's one of these rabid guys that really thinks that we should all be building what we design. He has a construction company. That doesn't mean that his guys build the building themselves, but they're on site supervising the subs every day. And if you all are interested in these kinds of conversations, he's somebody that, he's absolutely rabid about that. He doesn't understand why we as architects don't have the guts to empower ourselves to go out and, get a builder's license, take on the insurance, start small, and have a go at it, and be in charge, build it the way that we want it built. And you know, he's the best one that could speak to that, quite frankly. Have I answered your question? I don't know that I've answered your question.
If I could just add one thing, does the local enforcers of building code, do you have a kind of special relationship with them?
Like I said, there's no code enforcement here whatsoever. No, I mean that ironically enough, the mayor of Greensboro was actually a code inspector in Washington prior to becoming the mayor of Greensboro. But there's not any money in the local municipality to inspect the buildings. And frankly, our code, all of our consultants, and we have consultants from all over the US, actually all over the world, they're all working to IBC with us. And you know, this is, I would say, within the last 10 years. So some of the earlier projects played a little bit fast and loose with that. But I think we build much better than 99% of the folks around us. And we're a state institution, so we kind of have an obligation to make sure that we do that. And we make a set of construction drawings that nobody stamps, but that we bill from. So we have evidence of the kind of projects that we make. It's just there's nobody to sign off on them. So, and I'm not going to apologize for that. It's just that, you know, the work's here to be done. So we're trying to figure out a way to do it, you know. And I'll be honest, the mayor often will, you know, the mayor needed a culvert pipe engineer the other day, and he asked me if he could get help from our engineer in Chicago. So Joe Ferrugia did him a favor and helped spec that culvert pipe for him. So.
We have time for one more question. And if you'd like to turn your mic on or your video and ask your question to Andrew.
Yeah, hey Andrew, thank you, great presentation. I'm like a big fan of Mirror Studio. I'm interested in the graduate program, and personally, I'm not in the architecture program as undergraduate. And would you recommend people like me who doesn't have architecture background, but I'm like in interior design, has an interior design background? Would you recommend the program to people, you know, like me and other? Yeah. So could you talk?
Yes. We're interested in anybody that's interested, frankly. A desire to come and live in a rural place and immerse yourself is primary. We also, our projects are done in teams, so all of our work is teamwork. So you will bring something to the table that other people don't bring to the table, and we actually we enjoy the kind of the diversity of that. We, you know, in our teamwork, we're always looking for, you know, who's going to be the grunt, who's going to be the presenter, is there a designer in this group, yada yada yada. Mm-hmm. And people are actually asked to be quite open and honest about all of that. But they're also asked to challenge themselves. In the past, we've had also, I mean, particularly from overseas, we've had artists and really smart kids that have come and have learned so much so quickly. You kind of just jump on the train and you'll learn with us. So we don't. I think having a desire, having a design eye, that's probably the most important thing.
Could you talk a little bit more about the graduate program, like how different it is from the undergraduate program?
Well, currently the graduate program, it's a small select group of students. If you're an external student, likely you will be working on the 20K house. Our undergraduates most often run through our third year, or a lot of them run through the third year. So that becomes a little bit of an audition.
Mm-hmm.
So they have the privilege of working on the bigger community projects. But we ask mature folks like you to come and work on an aspect of the $20,000 house, just because it's a tough project, but it's also a kind of a defined scope of project, which we typically like to get done in 3 semesters or 3 and a bit semesters. So.
Thank you. Are there any, sorry, just a follow-up question. Are there any, because you mentioned people stay on and to voluntarily working on the project after they graduate from the program. Are there any graduates do that as well so they can get I guess, some opportunity to work on some more long-term projects?
Sorry, I coughed when you asked that second part of that question. Say that second part of that question again.
Are there any graduate students from the graduate program stay on after they graduate? So,
well, I would be dishonest. I mean, I've got a group now that's a graduate group that they're doing a research project into thermal mass, and their project, because of the insulation value that we need in these pods that they're building, we had to farm out these to be built out of SIPs. So the project is only actually going to start building when we get these SIPs panels, it will actually only start at about the moment that they're all graduating. And we accept that we have got into that as a studio. We're going to support them with housing and accommodation. But it's always very fuzzy. It's very difficult to say, okay, I've got 9 months. We like people to stay on a project and complete a project. It's always the best for everybody if a group or individuals stay on a project and complete the project. So what I'm trying to say is, it's very difficult to do anything in 9 months or 12 months.
For sure.
It's very rare that I have folks come in quicker than we expect, right? Because there's also a huge amount of ambition. So it's just the nature of the program, and the faculty and the staff buy into it, and so the students have to as well. So
I have one last follow-up question. Sorry for being greedy, because I know the undergraduate program is a post-professional program, which is just 1 year program. Right. Does the architecture school at Auburn University ever consider develop that into like a certified program, architecture program? Is there any conversation like that?
Our graduate program is a fledgling program at the moment, so we haven't got that far, to be quite honest with you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to conclude this evening. Thank you, Andrew, for staying up with us.
Okay. Sorry about the power problem.
No, you're good. And I just want to thank everyone for coming this evening. And just to remind you that next week we will have John Mayer of Mass Design Group with us. So I hope everyone has a good evening and a great rest of the week. And I'll see you all soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you all. See you all. Be careful.
Bye, everyone.